Welcome to the Insurgency with me, Steve Baker, the podcast that helps you get beyond the mere gossip of Westminster to the factors that really shape all of our lives. We've had that dread day today. It's been the budget. Joining me, as always, to discuss it is my co-host, the director of Fighting for a Free Future, Harry Richer. Harry.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a exciting, awful day, depending on your viewpoint. We had 43 tax rises in the budget, taking our record high tax burden to another record high. As we know, the number one priority of this government is growth, which is why the OBR has said that there are zero measures in this budget that will improve growth. But we're going to be getting into all of this on the Insurgency today. But I'm so excited to welcome our guest today, Mark Littlewood, who will be discussing everything related to Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer's budget today. Mark Littlewood is the director of Popular Conservatism, looking to bring back free market principles, low taxes, smaller state, low regulations to conservatism, as well as recognising the need to completely overhaul the way in which the state works and reverse Tony Blair's constitutional vandalism. Many of you will know Mark not only as the director of Popular Conservatism, but as the former head of the IEA for 14 years. Mark was also the co-founder of the No to ID movement, which we might get into today, given the budget suggested that the government are going to spend £1.8 billion on their digital ID programme over the next 3 years. And alongside that, Mark actually served as the head of communications for the Liberal Democrats Party from 2004 2007, which I think is probably the last time we could describe the Liberal Democrats as liberals. So I'm very, very excited to welcome Mark today. He appears regularly across your screens in the media and appears regularly in print media, and it's going to be incredibly exciting to get into everything related to the budget today.
So, Mark, welcome.
Great to be with you guys.
Yeah,
much to lament and probably much for us to agree on and dig into.
Well, let's get straight into it, because I wonder what really caught your eye most. Was it the tax rises? Was it the welfare spending increases? Was it the increased borrowing and debt? Or was it the lower productivity? What really caught your eye?
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, it's not that eye-catching, is it? Because it was tragically predictable. Essentially, that we knew roughly what was going to be in it, almost exactly what was going to be in it. We've had this complete pantomime for weeks of rolling the pitch and floating various ideas and getting halfway to suggesting that they were going to bite the bullet and actually put up income tax rates, perhaps offset for workers by a national insurance reduction. I mean, you'll have to explain this to me, Steve, in elected politics, what rolling the pitch means. Because I thought rolling the pitch was you roll the pitch and then you go out to bat on it, right? Yeah. But, I mean, Rachel Reeves has just been going around rolling pitches and then retreating to the pavilion. That's not the point of rolling the pitch at all. So it's been a fiasco, the whole build-up to it, capped off, of course, by the Office of Budget Responsibility putting everything into the public domain. And that was special,
wasn't it? I really enjoyed reading their documents as she spoke.
Well, actually, I've got to say, as a pundit, it was extremely helpful. But it is clearly a pretty serious breach of protocol. I mean, very serious breach of protocol.
Yeah.
But spoke to the whole omni-shambles of it. Look, in roundabout terms, where we're at is there's a range of tweaks here. All of them, I think, I stand to be corrected. There may be one exception. All of them in the wrong direction. Because the government basically thinks our present economic position is broadly sustainable. And if you just dial this dial a little bit here or that dial a little bit there, slightly increase the burden on the broadest shoulders, everything will come good. Yeah. And there's nothing to worry about. Yeah. So you've got a fiddly budget, as I say, which pushes, you're quite right, Steve, in the direction of higher taxation, highest tax burden ever by the end of this parliament as a proportion of GDP, higher spending. The Labour Party has decided to be, the Labour government has decided to be completely fiscally incontinent on spending. I can't think of anything that they're likely to drop. So we're going to have this pantomime of assuming that you can just continually raise tax rates, that the Laffer curve doesn't exist, and we're going to be in Groundhog Day. We'll be having the same discussion in a year's time.
Let me just test something about the credibility of this one chart. I'm just going to try and show our viewers the forecast of the current budget deficit. And if I must be reading that correctly, there's the line that says 0, and they're below the line. So that means that this Labour government thinks they're going to get into surplus.
That's right.
How credible do you think that is?
Completely incredible. We've been running budget deficits. Our last budget surplus, I think, was in 2001. Mm-hmm. So we've had a quarter of a century of this. We have also continually, over that quarter of a century, or certainly since 2010, have had the view that the promised land of a budget balanced budget is always 3 or 4 years away. It never arrives,
No,
but
quite.
it's always 3 or 4 years away.
Yeah, I saw Rob
And-
Colville said chancellors have been lying about this because of the way
There's no. I think the prospects. I mean, barring a. Can you imagine? I'm not sure I can, but I suppose it's conceivable that there is a benign black swan event of some sort. I mean, I can't really think what that would be. It's much easier to imagine a black swan event that would have colossally negative effects on the economic
Maybe
outlook.
AI and productivity.
Possibly, maybe something like AI has been understated or whatever. But no, I think the prospects of balancing the books and let alone tackling the mountain of debt are zero. I am strongly suspecting that the median position is this time next year we'll probably be gathered in this studio again talking about how quite probably the new Chancellor has attempted to fill in a black hole by raising tax by 30 billion. I'm expecting us to go round in that doom loop over and over again. It's like Groundhog Day, but each day gets worse.
It really is, because it was only the last budget in which Rachel Reeves said it was one and done, that she won't come back for more taxes. Her exact words were, "I won't come back for more taxes."
She said she wiped the slate clean,
Yeah.
which is ridiculous when you look at the long-term forecast.
It's just unbelievable. And I agree completely, Mark. We're going to be in the exact same position next year. And one of the key problems, and you've highlighted this a lot, Steve, and you spoke about it as well, Mark, is that they cannot get any kind of spending cuts or welfare cuts past their own MPs. It's just an absolute circus, the entire thing.
Yeah, that's the key. If you can't get spending down and you accept that, I mean, I can't quite say our debt is at the max. You can always borrow that extra pound more. But having been borrowing for 25 years, and then looking forward to our long-term liabilities, so the natural way that things will go is we will have more and more pensions to pay for.
Let's drill into that, because I think a lot of people don't realise just how big our public sector and state pension liabilities are. Do you want to just characterise that?
Yeah, well, it's colossal. I mean, it's important to distinguish between two things. Okay, so one is the general ageing of our population. Well, they will all have, and I suppose, assuming we haven't gone pop by then, I will eventually qualify for a triple lock state pension. It's important to realise, and oftentimes, I think, and understandably, the ordinary Joe public doesn't get this. Money has not been taken from your national insurance and cautiously and prudently invested for your old age. There is nothing, the cupboard is bare. If a private pensions company behaved like this, the directors of that company would be in prison. So all of that needs to be paid for somewhere. We have an ageing demographic. So fewer and fewer young people with, if you like, the burden of more and more pensioners on their shoulders. And the bit which just about is entering public debate now. I mean, Richard Tice goes on about this from Reform quite a lot. Public sector pensions. So if you've been working forever and a day in the NHS or as a teacher or as a policeman, these are absolutely colossal and again have not been saved for. Could run into trillions, the liability there. So in order to face that, you would hope, wouldn't you, that in 2025 we might be sort of sitting on a sovereign wealth fund of £1 trillion or £2 to be able to deal with these incoming headwinds. Quite the opposite. We are barely able to, we can't cover our own day-to-day expenditure.
So there's this very useful chart in the great book by John Moynihan, The Return to Growth. And on this green box on the chart is the stated number of the national debt. The brown box is absolutely gigantic, is the unfunded state pension liability. And the blue box, which is about half the size of the brown one, that is the unfunded public sector liabilities. But the point is, for people only listening to audio, is that the unfunded public sector pensions is more than the national debt again. And the state pensions is twice as much as that. So it ends up that it's a multiple of the national debt that everybody owes to cover these pension liabilities.
That's right. I mean, the politicians seems to have in mind this magic national debt number of 100% of GDP. Partly just it's easy to remember, I think. And the sort of idea is if we're in debt a bit less than that and we're hovering around in the high 90s, right, that the sort of things are under control. I mean, the goalposts have shifted here. It used to be considered that sort of 60 or 70% of debt to GDP was deeply problematic. But as you rightly say, Steve, the position is enormously worse. Because that's, if you like, your cash debt. If you were to liken it to an individual, this would be sort of, your overdraft at the bank. But if, as an individual, you knew that vast numbers of bills were going to be coming your way over the next 10 years, that you had not made any provision to pay. That's really the situation. So I think an honest audit of our accounts would be that our debt to GDP ratio is 300%, maybe 400%, once you include the liabilities in.
And it's easy to laugh at this circus of a government, but it's not funny, actually, is it? I mean, this is really bad stuff in 20 years.
Well, it's unsustainable, right? So, I'm always one for metaphors, and they don't quite necessarily all work perfectly. But we've basically got stage 1 cancer, our economy, and that's treatable. But the longer you leave it without treatment, the more it moves to stage 2, stage 3, and becomes harder to treat and eventually untreatable. And at the moment, I think we are in a position in which we could correct things if we took the correct treatment and we could return to health. I don't think we are certain to go to hell in a handcart, but that risk is measurably higher than it was 10, 15, 20 or 30 years ago. But we sort of know without admitting, I'm talking about the mainstream political class, that we've got stage 1 cancer and we're treating it with Lemsip. Well, I mean, that is not going to work. Whilst a Lemsip or a cup of cocoa might go down quite nicely for a while, it does not treat the underlying symptoms,
you've got to
which
get
are much more serious.
So Gordon Brown weighed into the debate and said that Rachel Reeves had done more to support children out of poverty than all the Conservative chancellors, however he phrased it. Do you think that what she's done is really seriously going to address child poverty, or do you think we need to do something more serious if we're going to lift people into prosperity?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is Social Democrats basically used the wrong golf clubs, right? So let's look at our welfare state in the round, by which I'm only meaning transfer payments, cash handouts. So taking money from one cohort and giving it to another, taking money from people who haven't got children, giving it to people who have got children, taking money from the rich and giving it to the relatively poor, taking it from, Now, I'm not against all forms of redistribution. But if you were to take the total bill that the government has of just essentially giving out money, however benign the intention might be, and you divide that by the total number of households in Britain, I think it comes to about £12,000 or £13,000 per household per year. And I'm not including in this the NHS or the education bill. This is just cash that the government will give. Why have we failed to crack poverty in Britain with a £12,000 a year per household welfare bill? I mean, I'm sort of presuming
that's all households, right?
All households.
So if you just looked at the transfers,
bottom 10%, we should be able to give them 120,000 a year.
I remember Ronald Reagan complaining about this in his famous 1964, I think it was, Time for Choosing speech, and we've learned nothing since before we were born.
And Reagan famously said, I can't remember what the numbers were in 1964 USA, but the amount he said, should be enough to cure poverty. Somewhere there must be some overhead.
That's right. It's terrible, Harry.
I mean, I think what's so interesting, and it does come out of our discussion, and it comes out of a lot of the discussions that we've had here on the podcast, is that we don't oppose the idea, obviously, of lifting people out of poverty, of lifting children out of poverty.
That's what we want to do.
Of course. That's why we push the free market, because we do want to lift people out of poverty. And history has shown time and time again that the best measure, the best thing that can lift people out of poverty is free market capitalism. With cutting with removing the child benefit cap, polling has shown that removing it in its entirety, only about 30% of the population support it. I mean, we should really speak about this measure. This was not about, even if you believe it would work, this was not about child poverty. This was a political measure about the Labour backbenchers. Would you agree with that, Mark?
Yes. I mean, and I think we have to have a serious discussion about it. Let's assume that it is a universal settled intention to provide some form of financial support to people with kids right up to the age of 18. Why would you do this through the mechanism of child benefit? Why not instead do it through the mechanism of a tax break, right? So rather than, I think I've got this right, I haven't got any kids, or at least none that I'm aware of, but it's about £1,000 a year I think you get in child benefit, isn't it? Something like that.
Something like that,
19, 20 quid a week. So rather than giving you £1,000 a year for having a child for 18 years, why don't we say we'll increase your income tax threshold by 5,000, right? Thereby, we're actually saying to those who could, who can potentially afford to have children, we're going to make that a bit easier for you, right? So you'll still be getting, in effect, £1,000 a year. But I'm afraid if you haven't been able to generate your own income, we're not just going to give you £1,000 for every child you have. So even if you were sympathetic to a limitless support for a limitless number of children, rather than two, and even if you weren't going to go to zero, that people should just pay themselves. There is a far, far better mechanism of doing it. So it's just more cash handouts. And as I say, if the welfare state, with the budget it has now got to just on transfer payments, has not cracked poverty in Britain, and I'm permanently told by the left that we haven't cracked poverty and there's vast numbers of vulnerable people everywhere, well, if true, the welfare state has failed. The idea that we need one more heave in the direction of the welfare state, that £12,000 per household a year isn't enough, but if we just get it to £13,000 per household a year, suddenly poverty would magically disappear.
Mark,
the system doesn't work.
Are you expecting this budget, with its, I think Rachel made a bold claim about its funding for the NHS, are you expecting this budget to solve the problems of the NHS?
No, it can't. There's no even real attempt to. I mean, the NHS is another system where the approach has just been to funnel money into it. And, we are reaching the limits of all of this.
Social care?
Well, we haven't even begun to tackle how we should fund social care, right? So that's another thing that I put on the almost on the liability list, even though it's hypothetical, because we don't actually know what the cost of that would be, whether it would be borne privately or publicly. That's a complete mess. So I don't see anything here that gives me any faith that any underlying issues in our economic
structure. Well, Mark, hang on a minute, because there was a special mention for that extremely sensitive topic that I've seen many parents wrestle with, special educational needs.
Oh, yeah.
That got a special mention. Are you expecting this budget to solve that problem?
Well, no, because that's another bit that's also gone similarly out of control, right? What we've seen in the welfare state is its extraordinary inability to funnel sums of money to where it is needed, right? So this isn't a kind of forensic picking out that you've got, a severely disabled child and, that child needs some assistance in getting to school or something. Really sort of precision forensic focus. We've just got buckets and buckets of money which we sort of throw around in the general direction of people that we think might need it. And that's why it's so completely ineffective. So I don't see anything here to be happy about. We will stagger on. As Adam Smith says, there's a lot of ruin in a nation, but there's only so much.
Now, there was one measure in the budget that I would say was good. You said at the start there might have been one, abolishing bingo duty. It's something at least.
Okay.
It's something positive.
Finally,
that raised £25 million for the Exchequer last year.
Right.
So we have finally abolished that.
That is just mere politics,
isn't it? Absurd.
Just...
So the things they've mainly highlighted, Rachel Reeves have highlighted raising the minimum wage as her positive measures, raising the minimum wage, which at a point in which youth unemployment is the highest since the pandemic, is never going to work out well. It just means that companies are simply going to hire people who are more experienced on the same wage, freezing prescription prices, which obviously will benefit some people, freezing rail prices, which, according to analysis, will benefit a much smaller pot of people than you would expect, because general rail usage has been going down over the years. And then bingo duty. And that's the only real, and the child benefit cap. That's the only real positive things that they have been able to push from this budget. And I think what's so interesting...
Even in their terms.
Even in their terms.
This is the stuff they're trumpeting.
This is the stuff that they're... exactly. This is the stuff they're trumpeting. And what's so interesting is, you were speaking about the welfare state, is that, welfare spending has never been higher. Taxes have never been higher. And I think we would all agree, and I think everyone would agree, that public services have never worked worse for people. Can we solve anything, Mark, without a radical overhaul of how the state operates?
I've reached the conclusion that we can't, and that there's an upstream problem for those of us who believe in the sort of solutions around free markets, deregulation, rather than enhanced state spending and guidance and price fixing. That, and I've reflected on this a lot from my tenure at the IEA, that those of us who I think have argued for the last 10 or 15 years, generally cogently and intelligently, for lighter touch regulation, lower taxes, a smaller role for the state, have actually been essentially wandering around in the valley of death, pointing out how completely unfertile the ground is beneath our feet, lamenting that fact, and occasionally spitting on the ground in the hope that this will render it fertile. I'm more of the view now that the problem of the valley of death is that the entire structure of our state has blocked the water coming down the mountain, and there is a kind of socialist-run dam halfway up the mountain, which is preventing the water from flowing. So whilst we can walk around in the Valley of Death and say, look, we know how to get crop yield
it's time to
high,
blow up the dam, isn't it?
We have to blow up the dam. And
And
that
what
means
does that really mean? Let's get away from the metaphor. What does that really mean doing?
So we need a complete overhaul of state infrastructure. I have become a huge sceptic, and I think I was always ambivalent rather than positive about independent bodies. I don't want independent of what?
Of politics,
Of
yeah.
politics.
But actually being accountable
So
to the
we
public.
have presumed, I think, basically since the rise of Blair, that there are now a whole range of policy areas which are supposedly non-contentious.
They're technocratic.
Like climate change, everybody completely agrees on climate change. It's uncontentious. We just need the experts to tell us exactly how to do it. It's an entirely technical.
This is, of course, socialism, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. And we have 400 or so quangos, these quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisations, inveigling themselves into virtually every part of our lives, with effectively, de facto, really no parliamentary or political oversight, right? I mean,
They have a go, but
ultimately,
useless.
Parliament could rein them in, they could abolish them, but, and from the Sentencing Guidance Council to Natural England to the Environment Agency, hundreds of these groups. And oddly, for somebody, who's a classical liberal free marketeer, I've actually reached the conclusion that we actually basically need a full-blown nationalisation programme in which all of these quangos are brought under direct ministerial control. And there's no ifs or buts. We don't have the Office for Budget Responsibility telling the Chancellor what his or her fiscal headroom is. The Chancellor may want to take advice from experts. Of course, I would welcome that. But the idea that the straitjacket is set by Richard Hughes and the OBR, madness. That sentencing guidance around ethnic minorities is set by these people completely detached from the Ministry of Justice, madness. So actually, I start my proposition about how to get this right is we need to get back to parliamentary sovereignty and democracy,
So
which
this
doesn't
is a
guarantee
radical
our
idea.
side wins.
No, but you are coming up with a radical proposal that elected politicians should govern the country when they're ministers. Is that right?
That is right, and I will just, but I will pull you up a bit on this, Steve. Quite often, folk from our side of the ledger have been more sceptical about that.
Yeah.
That perhaps we should have independent banks rather than populist politicians manipulating interest
Well,
rates to suit
I don't
the
mind them
opinion
being
polls.
independent as long as they operate in the market. It's when they're independent and have the
Yes.
privilege of state power that there's a massive
Yes.
problem, isn't it?
So I think that's right, but there's probably I am conceding that there are a good number of these quangos that I don't think should actually have political power at all. Right? I mean, Ofcom, I would get rid of 90% of it. Right? The idea that there's some
Do you know,
judgment being made about what's fair and balanced news coverage.
I
mean,
practically suggested that to Jeremy Hunt in 2010.
Right.
People saw that that's what I was suggesting to him in
right.
my question. And he knew what I was suggesting, and he didn't give me the answer that we should do that, but it's long overdue. Now then, all right, so we know what we need to do.
Yeah. That would be a
the
start.
direction
I'm
of
not giving
travel.
you a guarantee.
But
I'm giving you a chance.
Yeah, but look at the that's a good point. A guarantee, not a guarantee, but a chance. So Rachel Reeves was very political today because, of course, she was.
Yep.
And poor Liz Truss, is she poor Liz Truss?
Mm-hmm.
Poor Liz Truss got, pointed out as the cause of all the problems and so forth.
Yep.
Is Liz Truss now vindicated by events? Do you agree that Liz did a terrible job? Was there anything in her budget you approved of? What's the correct historical take
Yeah.
on Liz Truss's budget? And given that, how do we navigate these things better next time?
Yeah, I think this is a thorny question. And my basic view is that the strategy in her and Kwasi's mini budget in 2022 was definitely the right one. You can argue about timing and the level of surprise and whether it should have come out of a clear blue sky that we're going to cut the top rate of income tax. You can argue about that in terms of party management, political management, and media management, right? So there's a political lens by which you can look at it and say perhaps it wasn't the best politics. But looking at it from an economic lens, she just got damn unlucky that the music stopped on her watch.
So why did the music stop?
Well, overall, the era of madly low interest rates was coming to an end. We had got used to getting drunk on cheap credit. I have to say, I'm also worried at the moment that the sort of mainstream view of politicians of all stripes seems to be the lower interest rates are, the better. You know, I mean, preferably let's get them down to 3%, 2%, 1%, minus 5%.
I think that's partly because, of course, if you're a business person, then you see interest rates as part of your input costs. And, of course, you'd like your costs to be as low as possible. I mean, I'm in business now, and, of course, financing costs are a big deal.
Sure.
But of course, one of the jobs of politicians, I'm afraid, is to say to business people, price fixing's a bad thing.
Exactly right. And essentially, the era of madly low interest rates was coming to an end just at the time when Truss became Prime Minister. There's just a coincidence there. And then the Bank of England's behaviour, it gets quite complicated about LDIs and that they hadn't seen the risk of at the time. But the Bank of England's own report into the market turmoil of autumn 2022 concludes that about 2/3 of that market turmoil was down to their own behaviour. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know about you, but usually if somebody admits to me they're 2/3 to blame for something, it's more likely that the truth is something closer to 90%, right? Anybody who readily admits it's half your fault, half my fault, who readily admits that.
So this is why I said Paul Liz Truss, because actually that Bank of England report really vindicates her.
Correct.
I mean, of course, she did the energy thing as well.
Yes. I mean, I suppose, so, I mean, she's a good friend of mine. I had lunch with her earlier this week, and, you know, ideologically, she and I are very strongly aligned. We don't agree on everything. I think one thing that she was guilty of was, but again, this is a political, not an economic judgment. She naively assumed that the Conservative Parliamentary Party would allow the new Prime Minister a reasonable crack of the whip to pilot through a policy platform. And she discovered, to her horror, that was not the case. And consequently, you know, we can't possibly be seen to cut the 45p top tax rates to 40p. This was a matter of optics, right? Entirely a matter of optics. Her plan, I mean, she was out of the door really before an argument about this happened, was that welfare payments should go up only with wage growth, not the much higher rate of inflation at the time. Again, that was unpalatable to many of the people you were sitting on the green benches with. She had done the huge energy bailout thing, which I think was the wrong decision, but I can understand in moments of potential crises that politicians reach for that. So you might say...
Yeah, the politics of not doing anything would have been incredibly difficult. But this is where politics and economics and are you going to do the right thing or are you not going to do the right thing? Mark, a big question to finish because we have run out of time. Is there hope for a brighter and more prosperous future if we fight for freedom?
Yes, there is. I mean, I think things are very bleak at the moment, and I don't think we should assume we're going to win. I've always had a sort of optimistic feeling in my bones until recently that ultimately the goodies win. Like in the best Hollywood movies, there's a sort of huge struggle, but you know that the closing sequence is going to be that the good guys win. I don't think we are guaranteed to win by any manner or means. You can see things getting not just worse, they are going to get worse in the next 2 or 3 years, but horrifically worse. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. And I think we need to be more imaginative about how we put our arguments forward. Sometimes I think those of our persuasion are brilliant at logical, intellectual analysis, and I don't want to lose that. And we need to be intellectual.
We've got to feel it, haven't we?
But we haven't. Where's the heart?
We've got to make liberty attractive.
Yeah, where is the heart side of it? Not just the importance of the graphs that you've been showing, Steve, but I think we've got to get a little bit more va-va-voom.
That's why Harry's here.
So they often say that the darkest hour is just before the dawn, but that obviously isn't true. The darkest hour is when you get mugged, and then it's about 4 or 5 hours later that you get the dawn. Right? Yeah. So
and probably before the police turn up.
The police won't bother turning up anyway. So look, I think we can. I do not despair. I'm not I'm going to flee this country because I believe it's going to fall into communism or fascism. I think this can be turned around. But I think it's about an even bet. I don't think our odds are any better than that. It's about an even bet. But I like those odds because those are the sort of odds where the individual, well thought out contributions of a relatively small number of people can make the difference. And if we can shift those odds from, let's say, a 50% chance to a 60, 70 or 80% chance, we will have done the country and future generations a great service. And I think that is our heroic duty.
Well, Mark Littlewood, thank you very much indeed for coming on and giving us that call to action. This has been The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker, and our director, Harry Richer. Really grateful to Mark Littlewood for joining us, talking through all those issues. If you need to cheer yourself up, do download Noel Coward's There Are Bad Times Just Around the Corner. It will remind you that, yes, things could get worse, and they may, but also that things have been worse in the past and we have improved from there. So that's it. This has been The Insurgency with me, Steve Baker. Please like, share and subscribe.
We hope you're enjoying The Insurgency with Steve Baker. We've had so many wonderful guests on the show, and we hope you're enjoying all the content we're putting out.
We also have our Substack and a community and educational programs, but you can also get merchandise. If you would like a Fighting for a Free Future mug or baseball cap or, yes, t-shirt explaining that taxation is worse than theft, please visit our store. We've just had a fantastic interview and there will be an extended version available on the Substack.